So, as many of you probably know, gender transition can feel daunting, never ending, overwhelming. What can we do to make this arduous but very important and affirming and often exciting process at least a little bit more manageable? Let's work together to create, or at least start creating, your very own transition roadmap. Think of the roadmap as like a picture, a list, maybe a timeline of those personal needs and goals that you have related to your gender transition and steps that will help you achieve those goals. First and foremost, I'll say it as I've said in the past, it's super important to, recognize that this journey that we're going on, it's unique to each of you. Gender transition is unique and individualized to each person. So it's important to individualize goals and needs in your roadmap to what you need and want. You can use other people's journeys, my journey, other YouTubers, people in your life, community groups, people in media, whatever it may be, as a guide or a way of kind of figuring out what are some of the possible ways that transition can look. But make sure that you're starting with what you want rather than starting with what someone else might want and forcing yourself to fit into a transition path that may not fully align with what you're wanting and needing. One of the reasons that you probably started or at least considering gender transition is because that box of gender expectations you were initially placed in did not fit who you are. And we don't want to leave one box just to place ourselves into a different one. Even if that box is a little bigger and more freeing, we're still in another box because we're kind of restricting ourselves from fully being ourselves. We can think about, of course, in our roadmap, social transition steps, medical transition steps. I'll just kind of throw out some possibilities here. And some of this, all of this, or none of this may fit with what you want. Any and all of that is valid because it's about figuring out what is right for you. So if we start with social transition, which is often where we do start, kind of those first pieces of figuring out, navigating, negotiating our gender. This may consist of like changing how we express our gender. Of course, things like clothes, accessories, jewelry, makeup, even mannerisms, like how we kind of talk or present ourselves. It might involve adopting a new name or even legally changing our name to that new name, trying out a series of names and just seeing like, oh, let me just try this. This sounds interesting. A character on TV I like has this. Let me try it out. A week later, I don't like that. Let me try something new. That can be part of the process. It might involve adopting new pronouns, might involve voice training, coming out to friends, coming out to partners, family, coworkers, and so on. Part of this process will also involve, again, exploring what your gender means to you, something I've talked about in a lot of videos. It may include seeing a therapist. That may be part of your roadmap. Basically, this involves any and all of the ways that you may want to affirm your gender that don't involve any form of medical intervention. We might ask ourselves, is any form of medical intervention important to me? You might definitely know what medical transition steps you do or don't want to take, or you might be undecided. Both of those are normal. And typically it goes from maybe being undecided and then exploring and then figuring it out, like most things. Again, that's all okay. You're completely valid of whether you take one, many, or zero medical transition steps. Medical transition, of course, many of you know this, but it may look like one or more of the following, top surgery like a breast augmentation or a mastectomy, bottom surgery like vaginoplasty, phalloplasty, metoidioplasty, hopefully I pronounced all those correctly, body contouring, electrolysis, laser hair removal, hormone therapy, facial feminization, and more. Think of this in terms of how you want to see yourself, the ways in which you want to feel affirmed in your body. And part of this may also involve like, how do you want your body to be affirmed with others, like in romantic and intimate relationships? So how do we put all of this together? A timeline is how I thought about it. And if you're a bit more creative than me, which, many of you probably are, maybe creating a collage or a vision board or some sort of visualization of your journey could be helpful as well. So what are some of the things that might take longest? We can maybe start there. Again, this is coming from my own process of how I approach this. This may or may not work for you. Just as examples, like things like hair removal often has multiple treatments that will span months, likely at least a year or several years. And if you're uncertain about medical steps or even gender transition in general, you can think about what are some of those social transition steps, the steps that are reversible that we can explore now, even if it's just with ourselves or just with a few supportive people, because we can kind of try things out and see what fits and go from there. And of course, everyone's path will look different, at least to some extent, which can be both exciting and frustrating. You may be asking, well, Chloe, what did you do? What should I do? Can you just give me a blueprint? Thank you so much for asking. So, sort of timeline. And of course, I did not create all this at once. It's kind of an evolving work in progress as time went on. But to give you kind of an idea of my timeline, I first started transitioning in 2014, about September. I started with therapy about this time after doing a lot of rabbit hole, deep diving research. I'm trans, what now? People recommended therapy as a place you can start. Okay. Well, October, November, December, started occasionally presenting femininely in public and started gradually building up a new wardrobe. But I want to put a side note here, especially if you plan on taking hormones. Do not go crazy, or would not recommend going crazy with clothing shopping, because your body will change, especially during those first 2 to 3 months on hormones. Like something that you buy at the start of the transition probably will fit you very differently than, 2, 3, 4, 5 years on hormones. And then December 2014, I started hair removal. January the next year, joined a trans support group. Around January, February of 2015, I got connected with an affirming primary care provider through my therapist who could prescribe hormones. Before I started hormones, I did some sperm banking. And, I want to emphasize that, I was fortunate to be able to access these things, just both locally and financially. But, I wasn't sure, still not sure if I've want to have children, kind of 50-50, but I want to at least have the option, wanted to give myself the option, knowing that after a certain point, there's a high chance that hormone therapy will make me irreversibly sterile. And of course, bottom surgery. Yeah, that's going to do that too. And then, shortly thereafter, started hormone therapy, April 2015. And then, kind of in this timeline from like February to November, gradually was coming out to friends, family, coworkers. Around October, November of 2015, like right before coming out full time that November, I started that legal name change process. Read it could take a couple months for all that to be finalized, at least where I was at. For some people, depending on where you're at, it might be shorter, it might be longer. And then November 2015, I came out at work, came out full time, began the purge of my old wardrobe. I think around December, January 2015, 2016, got my name and gender marker changes on a lot of my documentation. And then that year, I scoured for gender affirming health insurance because I was thinking I am leaning more and more towards wanting to do bottom and or top surgery. And, began searching in spring and summer of 2016 for health insurance plans because, it's still not great now, but especially back then, it was a little more challenging, especially in Florida, to find plans that would, readily cover trans affirming care, especially surgery. I began researching options for surgeons, things like top surgery, bottom surgery, facial feminization surgery. January 2017 to April or May 2017, I had a series of consultations, after reaching out for appointments a few months prior. And again, these timelines can vary wildly depending on the surgeons that you're considering and the types of surgeries that you're doing as well. And then, June to like September of 2017, I obtained 2 letters for surgeries, one from like my long-term therapist that I was already seeing, and then one from a secondary therapist I saw for a couple sessions to get a letter. Very expensive. If you find the right person, you can definitely do it for a lot cheaper. There's, I think Gallup is a resource you can use for finding providers that are willing to write letters and do it in a affirming process that won't make you go broke. And because a lot of surgeries require 2 letters, at least the way systems are currently set up. And, it was around September 2017, so we're looking at 2.5 years about that. I was basically done with hair removal. Primarily hair removal I did on my face and genital region to prepare for surgery for that latter part. And then December 2017, I had my top and bottom surgeries, had some complications, had a revision surgery in April 2018. Not to scare anyone, but complications are a possibility when you get any major surgery, whether it's trans related or not. All surgeries come with complication rates and possibilities, and the longer and more intense they are, the higher those rates are. So just being realistic about the possibility. Hope it doesn't happen, but it can. Thankfully, I was able to find a urologist locally who was affirming, who's able to do the surgery. A month later, May 2018, I got FFS, and don't recommend getting in the span of 5 months. Top surgery, bottom surgery, revision or complication surgery, and then FFS, all in a very short span of time. But part of the reason for this is I was trying to get as much done as I could before I started grad school, when taking time off would have been a lot harder to navigate, and my health insurance probably wouldn't have been as good. So, and then after that, the rest is history. Went to grad school, blah, 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 therapy, creating community, YouTube channel, whatever. Yeah, those are kind of like some of the big steps when it comes to like social and medical transition. And then kind of like after that, just like living my life and figuring out things as I go, and other areas of my life beyond just like gender transition, like school and career. It really opens up the door when we figure out these pieces. I figure out who I am gender-wise. That can allow me to figure out more of like who I am and what do I want out of my life in other areas. I went through that kind of quickly, so I probably left some steps out. I again want to emphasize that my journey is just one of many, 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 many possible ways that your gender transition can look. Your journey may look very similar or very different to mine. This is just meant to give you an idea. I also know that I went relatively quickly, I would say, in terms of my transition. You may adopt the same pace, go faster, go slower. Just find the pace that works for you as you're figuring things out. Many of these details I figured out, along the way before transition and then during transition. And this definitely, again, was not mapped out all at once. I didn't have my 4-year plan of gender transition mapped out right away. I, kind of just really started with therapy and hair removal, and the rest was kind of a gradual process from there. I wasn't sure about hormones and surgery at first, but, hormones just felt right within those first couple months, an experience that I know a lot of trans people have talked about. And, I reevaluated over time what I wanted for my body, irrespective of what others might want. Like, for example, my partner at the time initially did not want me to get bottom surgery, but then I found out that, actually I have pretty severe genital dysphoria, so bottom surgery is necessary for me. And that's what's most important, what I personally need to live comfortably in my own body. I also see gender transition as this kind of like fluid, ongoing process that evolves over time without maybe a clearly defined beginning or end. Or maybe like more so, maybe a little more so a clearly defined beginning, but not so much a clearly defined end. The process of creating a transition roadmap can be time-intensive, complex, and ever-evolving, as I've stated. So again, consider this video a starting point rather than like the end-all be-all, this is all you need. Don't forget to have people help you along the way, like supportive friends, family, even therapists. You don't have to figure out all of this at once or by yourself. As I've said many times, it's an important point to really internalize and really remember. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What are your reactions to what I've shared? What do you think of the timeline that I shared? What do you think of just the idea of creating a roadmap? Is that something that you have already did in the past, or currently going through now? If so, like, what form has your roadmap taken? Any of you out there take a more creative path, or kind of more of like a list path or a timeline path like I created? And, what are some of those like key or important steps that, you wanted to figure out early in the timeline? Like for me, like things like hair removal, because I knew that would be time consuming. Are there, what was your decision process in terms of maybe how you prioritized different parts of your timeline or roadmap? Let me know all of that and more down in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit that like, share, and subscribe button below if you have not done so already. Tipsy and I love and appreciate all of you. Bye for now.